Yo, 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 what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Foxhole, brought to you by the Epic Podcast. So I'm here today, got another special guest for you today. First, I want to give a shout out to Foxy's Touch Handmade Creations for my new fresh hoodie that I got. Loving it. And today, I got with me Mr. Keith Palmer, who is going to have a nice conversation today with me regarding the fight game a little bit. So, first and foremost, I want to say what's up to my guest today, Keith. How you doing, man?
Man, I am doing fantastic. I'm so excited to be on here.
Man, I'm happy to
Should be
have you.
good.
Oh
We're
yeah,
gonna
oh yeah,
we're gonna get in the weeds.
oh yeah. I'm excited. I'm excited for this, man. I'm excited, man. First, I want to start off. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background in the fight game?
Yeah, so I had a kind of a weird start to it. Parents got. I'm gonna go way back. We're gonna go back to 1991.
Ooh,
So
okay.
yeah, it was a long time ago. My parents split. I was in sixth grade. My parents split up, moved to a new school. My mom actually was babysitting kids, and one of the guys that she babysitted his kid was a professional fighter. His name was Danny Morgan. He fought for a world title twice. Fought in front of the biggest crowd ever for a boxing match. It was on the Julio Cesar Chavez, Greg Haugen undercard.
Okay.
One time he was like 39 and 0.
Oh
39 and
wow.
0. Yeah, he was good. He was good, real good. And but yeah, he lost to Michael Nunn in that fight on the Chavez Haugen undercard. So what happened? Parents split up. Essentially, my mom's like, "Hey, we got to get him out of the house, man. He's, dad was around, right? But he just wasn't in the same house anymore. So Danny Morgan started taking me to the boxing gym, and it was cool, man. I went to this awesome, awesome gym. It was on 23rd in Delaware. There was two houses that were essentially right next to each other. The downstairs of one of the houses was a boxing gym. The guy that lived upstairs was a fight manager, and in the house next door, all these pro fighters lived. So that was my start to it. Met a guy named Ron Kern. Shares the same birthday as me, actually, which is kind of crazy. He was my amateur boxing coach, and dude, I just loved being around the gym. It was so awesome. There was so many. Like, I would go into the gym, meet a fighter, professional fighter that was in there, and then maybe the next week I'd see him fighting on ESPN. Just it was awesome. So yeah, it was good time, man.
Yeah, so you've been around fighting for quite a long time, is what it
Yeah.
sounds like. So I would have to ask you this because I know a guy who he doesn't he doesn't watch boxing. Sometimes he doesn't watch it for this or that reason. But I one thing that bothers me today, I need you to answer this for me. Why are there so many weight classes in boxing now?
Yeah, man. So you look at the old weight classes, right? A long time ago, right? It would be like, lightweight would be 135, it'd jump up to welterweight at 147. I think, this is kind of my theory on it. I think it was another way for a lot of the sanctioning bodies to essentially create more world champions. I don't know. I think some of those jumps were pretty big, right? You jump from 147 up to 160. Well, there was some good in between weight class guys that were, junior middleweights or so, but I think that's what it was, right? You just create more and more and more, and eventually it got out of control.
Though they've kind of gotten a little bit too carried away with that though, because I feel like if I'm not mistaken, it was like 17 or 18 weight classes now. It's like
Oh, it's
that's a lot.
crazy. It's crazy, and then they've got multiple champions per weight class also, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Yep.
all split up even more. Where you look back in the 30s and 40s, 50s, 60s, even then, well, I guess the 60s and 70s when it starts to change a little bit. But I mean, you had one champion in every weight class, and if you beat that champion, you were the best man on the planet, no
Yep.
doubt.
Yep.
Right now, it's like you got somebody that's a world champion. I'm like, are they the best on the planet?
And
Maybe. We're not sure, right?
right, and that's kind of what leads to the question beyond that question, which is why is it so hard to make fights happen? Because I feel like you get promoters and everything like that involved in this, and then it's almost like well, I'm the A side. I should get this, or it's a lot of back and forth, but it seems like it's very hard to get fights made, and we rarely get to see the fights that we want to see when they need to happen. It's later in people's career, like the Pacquiao Floyd, fight, or things like that, where even like right now, I feel like you're kind of borderline going to wait too long before we see Spence and Crawford fight. So what? Why is it so hard to make fights happen?
The line, man. You got to get the money, you got to get the TV, you got to get everything together, right? And you got to get people
Yeah.
that want to do it, right? I mean, I think deep down, some guys are like, their camps are like, are we really going to win this fight, right? So
Right.
then they wait, they hold out for a little bit more money, right? Or you may have a situation where somebody's not necessarily 100% marketable, right? And then they get another win or two, and then all of a sudden the fight's a bigger fight than it was a year and a half ago. Problem is then you get guys that are in their 30s, mid 30s, and then all of a sudden you get a super fight that's not necessarily what it would have been 3 or 4 years earlier. So it's unfortunate.
That's Yeah, I was gonna say that's unfortunate though. You know what I mean? Because you get into it and it's like, man, I wish I would have saw this fight, 5 years ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's I don't know. I guess as a fan of boxing, sometimes that's the frustrating thing about some of the fights that we don't get to see. So I guess kind of looking at an overview of boxing right now,
hmm
from how you see it, would you say it's in a good or bad place right now?
That's a question that it's always like really whenever that question gets asked, right? It's always like today's worse than it's ever been, right? And I don't know, man. I mean, it's boxing's one of those things that's going to be around forever. It's made it through. It's had its ups and its downs. I would say that right now, is it bad? No, but one of the problems with boxing is essentially your minor league system, which was really the club fights, the small pro shows. You don't see as many of those, and those are so important to boxing. It's always people always think it's just are the big fights, right? You've got to have a minor league system for fighters to develop as professionals. It's kind of a situation now where because there's not as many small pro shows, you have to develop as an amateur. You don't have as much opportunity to develop as pros. I remember like when I was starting, I mean, I was around fighters that had 100 fights, 200 fights. I know a guy that had almost 300 fights, right? Maybe he did. I don't know. Um, but you don't see that now. You don't have good opponents. You have less of them. There's still good opponents around, but 30 years ago it was deep, right? Boxing was deeper. I think the top guys now could fight in just about any era. The problem is when you start getting, to the guys that are, the fifth ranked all the way down, they're not as good. There's not as many of them. Where before it was just super, super, super deep. You had good fighters, great fighters, but you had lots of them. And I don't think that's the case now.
Okay, and that makes sense. It's one of those things where I wonder. For a while, I would hear people talk about viewership. Viewership's down for boxing. It was hard for them to really make those fights sometimes because it just wasn't enough people who wanted to watch it. You know what I mean? And as a fan of boxing, I hate to hear that because I enjoy watching it. It doesn't have to be a knockout for me to enjoy, a
Yeah.
boxing match. You know what I
Well,
mean?
back in the day, right? Look at the 76 Olympics, right? The guys that came out of that, Sugar Ray Leonard, right?
Hmm.
Everybody was watching, and it's like all of a sudden when Sugar Ray Leonard turns pro, it's a big deal,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And now when somebody turns pro, you're like, is it that big of a deal, right?
Right.
Because there's not that fan base that's built up. It's like when back then when a guy like Joe Frazier, I'm using Olympians, right? Muhammad
Mhm.
Ali, George Foreman, and I'm using mostly heavyweights, right? But they knew who they were, and it was a big deal. Pernell Whitaker, right, on that '84
Yeah,
team,
Sweet Pea.
Evan,
Yeah.
Evander Holyfield, Meldrick Taylor, right, and it was just a big deal. Now, when a guy turns pro, you may not hear about him, even if he was a really good amateur for 10, 12 fights, right? And
Yeah.
then by that time, with the way boxing is now, he's going to be fighting for a world title in a fight or two after that, right?
That's
So
true. That's true.
yeah, so it's a little different.
Well, and I guess on one hand I get it, but then it goes now. You see people branching off. There's so many different things that whether it was the UFC coming along and taking viewers, whether it's the bare knuckle fighting or the backyard brawls now that
Yeah.
are getting streamed on like YouTube and things like that. So I have to ask you, What are your thoughts on the celebrity boxing wave that's going on right now, or these exhibition matches that are going on? What are your thoughts on that? Good, bad? Like what do you? How do you feel about that?
And because I probably come across as like a purist, right? I mean, I'm a kind of old school with the people that I like in boxing. I kind of find some of the celebrity stuff a little entertaining, right? I realize we live in a different world. And the fact of the matter is, if somebody has a million Instagram followers, and you put them fighting somebody that has 500,000, people are going to watch it. Is it going to be the most prettiest or most technical boxing match? Absolutely not. It's probably going to look like a 4 round fight between two beginners, right? But that can be a good fight sometimes. It's not always bad. It's not pulling away from real boxing fans, though. Really, what it's doing is it's essentially its own little entity. And what it might do is actually attract somebody to boxing. Say for instance, Jake Paul, right? That's the big name, the big guy. You might have a Jake Paul fan that watches the entire undercard and is like, "Hey, this stuff's awesome," right? So then they might start watching more fights. You know, Jake, somebody that follows or watches Jake Paul just to watch Jake Paul, they weren't probably going to watch boxing anyway, but we might attract them, through that. It's easy to get kind of sidetracked and be like, well, oh gosh, Jake Paul's making this much money for a fight. He's not that great comparatively, right? I think he's actually okay. Um, he's a good, decent, you know, guy with 5, 6 fights. He's okay, right? But they were people that weren't going to be watching boxing anyway,
Yeah,
right?
that's true. That's true.
I'm intrigued by it though, man. I'm like, oh, this is kind of a weird thing. I got to check in and see who won, right?
Well, okay. So let me ask you, since you say that, let me ask you this. So just thinking about that, is there any celebrity fight that you want to see? And then after that,
Fantastic question.
yeah, and then hold on, I want you to answer this too, though. So after that, what are your thoughts thus far with the ones you've seen? Let's say the Jake Paul, the Mike Tyson, the Roy Jones,
Uh,
Adrian Peterson, Frank Gore, Le'Veon Bell. Have any of them done anything where you'd be like, huh, kind of surprise you, in a good way or in a bad way?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, how awesome was it seeing Mike Tyson just come back out there at all, right? I mean, that's kind of like Mike Tyson, growing up. If you grew up in the '80s, man, he was like a superhero. I mean, it just, hitting people and they freaking just, do crazy stuff whenever he actually lands a punch on them, right? I think that's awesome. I think it's pretty cool that you've got some, freakish athletes like some of the running backs, right? Le'Veon Bell and Adrian Peterson. Yeah, I want to see some guys like that. I want to see how they look like when they throw a punch, right? Does the athletic ability translate over? As far as like a fight that would just be like, man, what do I want to see? God, I'm trying to think. It'd probably be somebody that's got a reputation. Hey, I don't know. I'd like to see maybe The Rock fight somebody. I don't know. I don't know who I'd put him in with though. I have to give that some thought. Maybe I'll be able to give you an answer by the
Okay, all right, fair, fair. That would be interesting. I didn't think about him. So that's interesting. That's interesting. I wonder if he would even be willing to do that, though. You know what I mean? Because that's a lot
Oh
of you
yeah,
got to put a lot of pride and ego that's out
I
there
t-
for that one.
I sure as hell wouldn't if I was him.
No, he makes too much money doing everything else, so I couldn't blame him for that. So I'm gonna get into another part of some questions that I'm very curious to see your thoughts on. So right now, currently,
Mhm.
who are your top five fighters? I don't care the weight
Uh,
class. The weight class doesn't matter. Overall, who are your top five fighters? And then I want you to tell me: is this based upon from a skill standpoint, are you saying this is your top five, or is it just your top five based upon who you like to watch?
go with probably number one. Anyway, right? I like watching him because it's just the balance, the power. It's a total package, right? I mean, it's like another guy that I used to like to watch, kind of similar because the balance and everything was Ricardo Lopez, a guy that was like in the '90s. That was pretty much maybe the pound for pound, right? At best, he was right up there with Roy Jones, but he was 105 pounds, so nobody cared. He's kind of in that same vein. Number two, possibly Usyk, maybe I would say he's definitely in my top five. Three, I'm gonna go with Terrence Crawford. Four and five is kind of where it gets a little tricky. I want to say four, Errol Spence. Number five, right? This is just going to be a personal pick, just because I really like him. Tyson Fury. That's my top five. Wait,
So give me those five again. You said so. We had Tyson Fury. We had
yep,
Usyk.
yep. Tyson Fury, Usyk, anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
Terrence Crawford, and I'd say Errol Spence.
And Earl Spence. Okay. So, and I thought I heard you right, but I wanted to get you again because you know I got a question now for you.
Oh yeah,
So,
good.
okay. So we have those five fighters, and is there what keeps Shakur Stevenson or Gervonta Davis or Devin Haney, a Canelo or a Benavidez? What keeps those guys out of your top five?
Put Canelo in there and not put Bivol in there, right?
Fair, fair.
So I struggle with that one. Even though I mean, obviously Canelo is when he goes to 75, he's getting a little out of his range. I think,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I agree.
Uh, I think Canelo is definitely one that's right in there. I mean, you could easily put Canelo in there for say the number five spot, right? I wouldn't
Hmm.
put him against ahead of like Crawford and Spence. I don't think. Maybe I don't know. Spence is kind of inactive, but I think Crawford's right up there. Haney and Davis, those guys, I think they're close,
Okay.
right? I think they're close. Not quite there. Shakur Stevenson, I think, is like right on the outside fringe of it. But
Okay.
that's to me. Well, next generation's not the right way of putting it because their time is really now,
Hmm.
right? But it's just like the resume's not quite there, just because they haven't been able to really. I say that fight each other, but Crawford and Spence haven't fought each other yet, right? So, but those are the guys where 2 years from now, you ask, they're going to be the ones that are going to take over those spots. I think.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. And just I gotta ask this because it's a question that everyone asks. Just curious, who would you pick in a Spence Crawford fight? Who are you taking?
Could have fought in any era against any caliber of fighter. You put Crawford in the 30s or 40s. I think Crawford would have had 120, 130 fights, man, and he would have been right in there with the best of them. Spence is, I think, one of those guys that very good. I think that the accident and all that. I want to see how he really bounces back from that. That kind of stuff takes a lot out of a fighter. But obviously Spence is bigger, but I think Crawford takes that one.
For decision.
Oh man, oh you
Uh
putting it
huh.
on me here,
Oh
putting it on
yeah.
me here. You know what? God, sometimes I make stupid fight predictions. I think Crawford stops him late.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
But
That's fair.
I mean, I could be absolutely wrong with that. I mean, but I think that it's entirely possible. Crawford's got another gear to him, man. I think he's just one of those guys. He reminds me of kind of like a Marvin Hagler type, right? It's just
Yeah.
like you can tell he's just he's a fighter, man, all the way through.
Marvelous Marvin, boy, he was a
Yeah.
fighter, boy. Woo, he was tough. He was tough. Um, so are there any fights? I guess you would say currently with fighters. Any of the guys currently? We know we got some fights coming up here soon, and we just had the Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia fight. But are there any fights that you want to see happen, or that if it were up to you, are there any fights that you would make happen now because you feel like now's the time to make them happen?
Spence is one right off the bat. Let's just check that one, get it done. Usyk and Fury, right? I mean, it's crazy. They named my top five, and it's possible that you could have two fights made out of that. Right? Those are freaking mega fights. Um, Gosh, let's see. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on some of them. I think Lomachenko he fits in kind of, but he's kind of on the downslide. I'm interested with him and Haney too, right? I think that's an interesting fight. I think Haney's going to win that one. Um, but yeah, I think those two are my main ones, right? You got to get those big. What you don't want is a situation like, hey, this fight never happened, right? Like the Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe, right? Everybody's like, well, how would that have been? You don't want to be asking those questions, and I think the big ones you got to get off the board is Crawford and Spence and Usyk and Fury. What about you? I'm gonna turn it back on you.
Well, I mean, I guess first, let me ask you: do you think either one gets done fight wise? Either the Spence Crawford or the Usyk and Fury? Do you think either one gets done?
I think Spence Crawford for sure, right? I
Yeah,
think that one's going to happen. Fury and Usyk. I don't know, man. Fury's he's such an interesting person. I think there's a part of Fury that could just walk away and just be like, I'm done. Right?
yeah,
You just never know what happens tomorrow with him. I think it'd be a shame
yeah.
because
I agree.
I don't know who would win it. I can't really pick that one at all.
That'd be a
So
good one. I think for me, fight wise, and you kind of know me, I kind of like that lightweight division. You know what I mean? I'm really a fan of a lot of those guys in that division. I don't know if there's a specific fight, but I actually would like to see in some form or fashion. I want to see Tank in there with Shakur. I want to see Tank in there with Haney, and then vice versa. I want to see Haney with Shakur. I want to see that fight as well. But I'm gonna go ahead and go a step further. I actually want to see you got Josh Taylor and Teofimo Lopez fighting a little later this year. I want to see. I know Tank can make the jump for sure, and they're saying Haney may be making the jump to 140. Hey, why not? Let's see Teofimo fight. Both of those guys as well. Let's see. I think Josh Taylor, from what I'm hearing, is he's gonna send Teofimo to retirement, is what he said, and then he wants to move up, and I think he said fight Charlo. He wants to challenge him for the belt. So if he moves up, I think that's too big of a jump, for the Tank or one of those guys. But I would definitely like to see that little grouping of Teofimo, Gervonta, Haney, all that. And I'm not even going to give up, even though people probably are. I'm not going to even give up on Ryan Garcia. I mean, he's 24 years old. I take my hat off, man. Like guys today, to me, in some instances, they're afraid to take a loss. I give him credit, man, for getting in the ring. Did he look the best? No, but you can see that he has some things that you can work with. I think in terms of from a boxing standpoint, I don't even want to bring up this name. I really don't, but I wouldn't mind seeing Ryan Garcia fight Rolly Romero.
thing with Garcia, right, is just how's he going to rebound from that? Right? It's I think confidence and that it's when you're on an upswing. It's I think we've talked about this in the past too, right? It's even like you can't get somebody rattled, and you got to build them back up right. So if they throw him back into that mix too soon, it could be problematic, right? But you can't baby him too much either. So I like what you're saying there, though, because it talks about really how strong boxing actually is. That reminds me of like the early to mid '90s, right? When you're talking, Pernell Whitaker and De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad and Ike Corte, and you had like so many guys that you could just mix and match there, and you couldn't make a bad fight out of that group, right? Every one of those, yeah, everybody you mentioned. So it's like, okay, that shows the boxing strong, right?
Yep.
That right,
Yep.
that right there proves it's strong.
Yep, and I just hope that we start to see some of those fights get made. Because, like I said, I'm not a Romero guy, but I can't tell you. I'll be honest, he's entertaining. Because when he gets in the ring, he's looking to knock a guy out. He kind of switched it up against Tank, and he still got himself knocked out. But he switched it up. He didn't go out there just swinging for the fences. You know what I mean? So it just for me, it's like why not? Let's see him against a Ryan Garcia or someone like that. Let's kind of see how that would work for him. A name we haven't mentioned, but we've talked about off record is Frank Martin. How does
Yeah,
how does a guy like that or Keyshawn Davis, like how do these guys fit into that mix? You know what I mean? So like there's a lot of names and a lot of young guys who are coming up who I mean, I just think it makes for some very interesting fights if they're able to get them done. You know,
absolutely. Well, the good thing is they're all young, right? So they are going to get done at some point, right? I
yeah,
mean, what we don't want is it for it to happen when they're 34, 35, 36 years old, right? I mean, you
right.
want it to happen when they're 28, 29, 30, right? That's typically when a fighter peaks, right?
Yep,
It's
yep.
late 20s, early 30s, unless you're a heavyweight, right? Heavyweights typically peak a little bit later.
Hmm.
Yeah, lighter guys, it's Pacquiao is the exception.
Man, that's because that guy's his calves were humongous. So he was like the exception. It's like his legs didn't give. He still had some pop in his punches. You know what I mean? So yeah,
Oh
he's
man,
the exception to that rule for sure. For
yeah,
sure.
what a fantastic fighter, man. I mean, just what he accomplished, and just I
Yeah.
mean, he could still fight a lot of those guys, right? Which is
Oh yeah.
crazy.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's
Crazy,
yeah.
crazy. I mean, it's crazy to say, but I mean, yeah, it would just it. I guess let me even say this. It's interesting to see now the difference in terms of boxing as well. Because I mean, you talk about whether it was the Ali and Frazier, man, Leonard Hag, like there were so many epic fights. I mean, even your guy, Julio Cesar Chavez. I mean, how many fights have we seen from, especially like in those 80s, 90s, where it's like, man, that was an epic fight. That I mean, you know what I mean? Like it was must see TV, and I just feel like we still haven't seen that yet, and we're still missing that.
It's there though, right? It's like it's
Yeah,
just knowing it can all happen and all the pieces will fall into place. It's a better problem to have than not good, than having two good fighters, right? And only waiting
yeah,
on two fights
true.
to happen. Because what's going to happen with the names you mentioned, if somebody decides to sit out and decides to hold out for money, the other good fights are going to get made, and they're going to be the one that's left sitting holding nothing,
True,
right? So
true.
it's going to be forced to happen. There's so many of them that it's like, okay, well, you sit on the side, don't participate, and guess what's going to happen? You're going to get forgotten,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
right? So.
Do you have any thoughts? And this is just a random thought that just came up. Because he has a brother now, and I forgot what weight division he's in. I would have to look it up. But Gary Russell.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Any thoughts on him? Because like I saw his last fight, and I know he was fighting with an injured hand, and there was a big uproar. I watched the fight. I'll be honest, from a point system standpoint, I could argue that he won that fight, even though they took the belt away. Just curious, not even particularly on a fight with him. What are your thoughts about him as a fighter? Because I don't know. I feel like you hear kind of different things about him in terms of what people think of him, especially at this stage, because he doesn't fight very often.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, I think I remember, like, my story. I kind of took a little, not as up to speed on a lot of the guys, but I remember him being a really, really good amateur, super good amateur. Good, solid fighter, right? I loved it. I think he's slick, super slick, if I remember right with him. So he's a kind of guy can sneak up on people, right? As long as they don't get old overnight, right? As long as like I said, the refixes stay intact. Yeah, if I remember right, super slick. Not always super exciting, if I recall correctly, but yeah.
You're right about that. No, no,
But you
not
know
at all.
what? I mean, it's not always about excitement, right? I mean, it's like there's an art form to it.
Yep,
I mean, Pernell Whitaker wasn't always exciting. What Mayweather wasn't always exciting. If you
nope,
had the right eye for it, though, you're like, okay, this is what I want to watch, right?
yep,
You
yep,
know, so
yep,
some people can't stand to watch two people just get in there and slug it out, right? I mean,
yeah.
there's some purists that it's like, they're like, why are you doing that, right? So,
You
I
know
mean,
what?
different.
I just thought about, and I'll add this fight to the list. May not be sexy, but curious. I actually would like to see if Loma can still make weight. I would like to see him and Gary Russell fight.
Good, right? Those are two solid amateurs, right? It's
Yep,
like, I mean, yeah, I think that would be fantastic. I mean,
yep.
it's
I,
just one
I,
of those
I want to
fights.
see that. Yeah, I want to see that. I would watch that. That would definitely be one of those where it's worth coming out. So let me ask you this then, as we're talking about upcoming fights. There's two fights I have a question for you for. What are your thoughts on the Haney and Lomo fight that are about to happen? I know you mentioned that you would pick Haney to win, but give me a little bit more as to why you would pick Haney over Lomo in the fight.
You've got a young guy, you've got a fast guy, and I mean they're both fast, right? But I think Haney's got too much just being the younger guy, and he does is it's a bad style matchup. I think it's one of those that just the speed kind of kills on that one, and I can see that being real problematic for Lomachenko at this stage. So that's why I would pick Haney over him in this one. And with guys, gosh, I mean, how many amateur fights did Lomachenko have? I mean, we're talking what, 250, 300 maybe. There's a lot of mileage there, and when you're going up against somebody who's young and fast and hungry, right? Just got a
Yep.
name. Lomachenko, he's cemented his legacy, right?
Yeah.
It's like the
Yeah.
other guys, like, hey, I gotta prove my worth. And the last thing you want to be doing is going out and getting beaten by an older Lomachenko, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Seriously.
then they're gonna say, well, hey, guess what he would have done to you when he was younger, right?
Yeah. True.
So,
True. And then I even think honestly, I think all the pressure's on Haney. I really do.
absolutely.
I think all the pressure's on him because I'm with you. I think if he loses I think if he loses to Lomo at this stage, I don't think you can make a Shakur fight. I don't think you can make a Tank fight. I don't think those guys then at that point see you on their level, and I don't think those fights get done.
They'll get done, but they won't be big fights. Right? It'll happen eventually, but it'll kind of be a situation where they may even be more likely to get done. Right?
Well,
It's
true,
like,
true.
yeah, I
Because he'll
mean,
be, yeah,
yeah, I mean, in that situation, I think you lose to a guy like that, and everybody knows he's not on his last leg, right? He's kind of like towards the end, though.
yep.
I just think it's from a marketability standpoint, it's tough to come back. It's not like Canelo losing to a prime Mayweather.
No, no, no,
It's
no, no,
not
no,
that setup, right?
no,
It's like
no.
it's. I mean, Lomachenko's not that level.
No, no, no,
So
no, no, no. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I'll say this. I'm curious to see how it plays out. I've actually heard a few people picking Lomo to win the fight, which I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised by that because if I'm picking Haney to win that one, and I guess to a degree, I don't know how it's close unless Lomo can really make Haney fight his fight. You know
see,
what
I
I
think
mean?
I think it's not like he's going to outwork him, right? And I don't think he's going to outspeed him. I think he's just going to be kind of one of those. You'll see some reflexes start to
Yep,
come into play, and
yep.
I think he'll have a harder time pulling the trigger. It's not going to be like I don't think it's going to be absolutely one sided, but I think it's going to be a situation where he's going to have a hard time getting to him. He's going to get
Mm-hmm.
outworked. He's going to get. It's like he's going to wait, and I think you're going to see Haney get off first, right? And then I
Yep.
think what you're going to see is be behind on the scorecards, and then you get a guy like Lomachenko that's behind on the scorecards. What's he going to do to Haney?
Nah,
He's
nothing.
not going to do much. He doesn't have the
No,
style, right?
no.
He doesn't have the style to force and apply pressure. I don't think so. Uh, it's yeah,
Yeah,
right.
no, yeah, yeah. I mean, it'll be. I guess it'll be interesting to see how Lomo plays it. You know what I mean? I think we kind of know what to expect from Haney. I'm curious to see if Lomo switches anything up, or how he kind of attacks Haney because um, he's going to need to apply pressure and figure out a way to make Haney uncomfortable to win that fight. So um, the other fight. Oh, go ahead.
You
Go
got
ahead. I'm sorry.
he's an absolute veteran, right? And he's got
Yep.
every trick in the book. So it's like, okay, what can he pull out and show that Haney hasn't seen? And it's
Yeah.
possible he's got some things that he hasn't seen. So
Oh yeah, because I mean Haney's still young. You know what I mean? He's still
yeah,
young, so there's a lot for him to learn on that. So I guess the second fight that I need to ask you about is going to be the Canelo. Or would you like to see Canelo versus Benavidez?
you know what? I think I would. And but here's the thing, right? It's Canelo is what 32, I think, right? 32, but with a lot of mileage on him. It's a very intriguing fight. I don't know who I would pick, but I don't think a Canelo that's at 90% is going to beat Benavidez. I think he's going to have to be at 100%. That's a fight that if you're going to make it, you got to make it soon. I don't want to see that fight when Canelo is 34, 30, yeah, 35, because at that point, I mean, you got a younger guy. If you're going to make it, you got to make it now.
I think Benavidez wants the fight. I'll be honest. I'm not so sure Canelo wants that fight though.
Well, that's definitely an A and a B side there, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, when you're
yeah,
talking A and B side, it's like, hey, the B side wants it, the A side's like, hey, you know what? We'll do this when I want to, if I want to.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I mean, I guess we'll kind of see how they kind of go about because that's one of those things where um, there's a lot to be gained on one end, and probably, like you said, not as much on the other side. If he comes out victorious, so I don't know that we'll see that fight. But I'm with you. I think if it's gonna happen, I want to see it within the next year. Um, but if it doesn't, then you know what I mean. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and you look at it too. It's like, hey, where's what other for Benavidez? That's his big money fight, right? And
Yep.
Canelo can fight some other guys, and two guys that aren't nowhere near that level, and make more than he would fight in that one fight, right? So it's like I see why Canelo wouldn't do it, and I see why Benavidez wants to.
It makes sense. Let me jump off topic because
Okay.
there's something that I want to kind of dive into with you as we were talking. So, um, give me give me a good story because I know you got thousands of stories,
oh,
man. Give me a good
oh,
story. What? But this is a multi-part question. So the first part from your fighting days, from whether it's a good fight that you had. Um, Give me something good and juicy about Keith when he was fighting. As this young, hungry fighter. Give me a good story
oh,
about that
shoot, man. You know what? Here's the funny thing, man. I like as a fighter, don't know that I was that great. I'm pretty humble with it. I was like an okay, and okay is like an overstatement as an amateur. I just loved being around it. So I'm just trying to think, man. Oh gosh, most of my good stories actually come from like traveling to like MMA fights and boxing matches. Man, I'd have to think of a good one when I was actually fighting though. Man, you know what? I will tell you something, man. It's not necessarily from a fight, but I remember. God, um, yeah. So I remember. I'll tell you one. It's not actually like a sanctioned boxing match, but when I first moved, I first started learning how to box. Obviously, I wanted to show it off, right? I'm young, 11, 12 years old. May have told you this story, but so I would always like box the neighborhood kids, and sometimes I'd get them. Like eventually, I'd convince them, hey, I'll box two of you at the same time, right? You have one glove, I'll have, so I give them both a pair of gloves, and eventually I figured out how to do that. But down the street, man, they figured out they were like, oh, right, this kid thinks he's tough, right? So they got this guy, man, that was like, I don't know, I'm like 11, 12, and he's like 20 years old, I think. And, they knock on my door when I get off school, and they're like, hey, come outside. And I was like, all right, go out there. And they're like, hey, we got somebody to box you, right? And I go down the street, and it's like this, dude, he had a mustache, and he was like 20 some years old, right? And I'm like, oh shit, man, I'm gonna get beat up, right?
time.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, I'm gonna get beat up, man. And I remember, right? So we boxed into these like carport things, right? And this is the first story that popped into my head. I probably got other good ones, but so this guy goes out there, right? And he stands, and I was like, oh, this is awesome. He doesn't know how to box. I was like, so his hands were like all like kind of like higher than normal. And I was so scared, man. I threw like 10 punches in a row, and every one of them landed. And I was like, oh God, now he's going to hit me back, right? And that guy, he just, he's like, oh man. He's like, I ain't never been hit like that. He's like, and I was like, oh God, thank you, God, man. I was like, but yeah, I mean, that's the first one that popped into my head, man. I mean, it's like, yeah, it was just, it's one of those things, man. Sometimes when you're scared, you fight good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's true.
Yeah,
So what
right.
what
So,
what what weight class did you fight in?
man, so my first amateur fight, I believe it or not, I was 115 pounds, right?
Okay. Okay.
So my first amateur fight was 115. My second one, I think I was like 118, and then I fought at like 126, and then 135, 147, and then all of a sudden, I think between my eighth and ninth grade, it's like I went from like 147 to like 190 pounds. I had a big growth
Oh
spurt. I think
man.
I remember my dad thinking I was on steroids, right? I was like, Dad, I don't even know where to get steroids, man. I was like, I was big, man. I was big, and I was in shape. It wasn't like fat, right? So my last amateur fight, I was probably 225. So I
Oh
fought
my.
everywhere from like 115 up to like 225. It was just, I'm growing along the way. Tell you what, there's a certain point where they do start hitting harder too. Right?
Oh
It's like,
yeah.
oh yeah, yeah. When I first started, man, it was like just fast punches, right? It was like a game of tag, right? It was just like then you get to like 147, and you're like, oh, these are starting to hurt.
Have
Yeah,
you
so
is there any Is any of that like stick out in terms of like somebody you fought where you're like, oh man, this dude hits, this dude hits like a freaking bag of bricks.
Oh
Anybody who
man, I'll
stuck.
tell you what, dude. So this is a funny story, right? So I remember I was in school, right, and it was like, I'm boxing and Golden Gloves one year, my first year fighting in the Golden Gloves, and I was like, I told everybody, right? I'm all fired up and excited about it, and a bunch of people from school came, and I'm like 16 years old, and I fought this guy in the Golden Gloves, and man, it's like he had a sweatshirt on, and then he took his sweatshirt off, and dude was jacked, man. And it was like I'm still a kid, man. And dude was like pretty strong. He beat me pretty good. Right? It was I'll never forget it though, man. He's like he just like jumped right on me. Right? It was just like, and it was just like I was like, oh, I was like, kind of like overwhelmed. I actually got stopped in that one. But yeah, that one. At that point, I'm like, yeah, yeah, that one was
Phew.
one. And then a couple years later, fought in the Golden Gloves again, and I think I was a super heavyweight then, and ended up winning that year. It wasn't the Open though. It was like one of the regular, So
Mhm.
like I said, I was okay. you know, I was okay, right? I wouldn't, being around fighters that I do consider to be good fighters. I don't want to throw myself into that
Oh,
group.
no, that's all right. That's
yeah.
all right. Do you so anything that sticks out in your mind in terms of because you train too? That's the other thing that
Oh yeah.
people I want people to know. Like, not only did you fight, but you also train, and uh, you train boxing, and you've also trained some MMA fighters, right?
Yeah, so the way it worked out, right? When I was growing up at the gym, I think I just liked being around the gym, right? It was an awesome spot for me to be in. I loved the gym, and I kind of knew I wasn't really going to be a certain level of fighter, right? And so it's like, pretty much when I was about 20 years old, I said, you know what, I want to be around the sport, right? And I started coaching some amateur fighters, and then I started working with some pro fighters. First pro fighter I worked with was one of the guys that was at the gym, a guy named Rob Blakely. He had, God, 140, 150 fights, right? He just, I mean, I was a young trainer, and he treated me like I was, with respect, right? It was awesome. I'm so grateful for that. So was coaching amateurs, coaching some pros, took some fighters overseas, and then all of a sudden, around like 2003, maybe 2002, I met some MMA guys, and I was like, oh, nobody knows how to box. I was like, I'm going to teach these guys how to box, right? And had some pretty good MMA fighters. Then I started managing them because I was like, nobody really knows how to build up a fighter. Right? It's like I learned that in the boxing business, so that was kind of how that transition worked for me.
Any good stories that you have from your training days?
Oh gosh, man, I got so many. I got so many. I think I was telling you about this, right? There's a documentary about Lee Murray that's out right now, right? They pulled off the biggest bank robbery in history. Yeah, biggest. That's like $100 million, right? Something ridiculous, right? It's on
Yeah.
Showtime. It's on Showtime. But I think it was what February or March of I think 2005. I go over to this place called it's Cage Rage in England, right? And I remember being on stage, kind of like where all the fighters were, and I was like,
Mhm.
looking over, I was like, "Ooh, that's Lee Murray." I was like, "That guy's kind of scary, man." Right? It's like you just get a vibe, right? You just know, right? I'm like, yeah, don't look at that guy wrong, right? Well,
Yeah.
about 3 weeks later, they pulled off that bank robbery. So I mean, it was like right in that time frame, and I was like, okay, man, my radar of who not to mess with is pretty good right now. I think it was like $100 million though, biggest bank robbery in history, ever,
Wow.
anywhere. And he's in prison in like Morocco, right? But I mean, that was just one of those. It was
Oh.
like I was like, man, I remember saying, I was like, ugh, that's a legit dude over there, right? And then I was like, then a couple weeks later, man, hear about that bank robbery, but yeah, man. I mean, it's like, God, there's so many stories though. I mean, I was like the MMA stuff is actually some of the better stuff because
Yeah.
it's kind of like the Wild West back then. Like there was no regulation or nothing. There was just crazy stuff going on all over the
Because that
place,
was
man.
really when it was kind of first getting started with like Ken Shamrock and those guys, wasn't it?
It was right after, right? It was kind of like the start of like, I remember the first UFC that I took a fighter to was UFC 45,
Okay.
right? And I don't even know what number they're
I
up to
think they're
now.
like two something now, like 250 or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it was something ridiculous, man. But back then, it was God, the characters, man. For the people that were fighting in those things back then, you were legit, right? If you were like, yeah, this is what I want to do with my life, right? I'm going to go off and I'm going to fight these type of fights. You were a special breed
Especially.
of person there, man. Yeah, you were like, like not it's not your normal person, right? Then obviously, if you're hanging out with those kind of guys on a daily basis, you're like, yeah, there's some good stories that come out of this.
I bet, man.
Oh
Um,
man,
Look, now I got one other thing to ask you. And then like I said, I don't want to keep you all evening, but I do want you, and you can take a moment if you want to think about this. But I do think it's important. One thing I think it's always important to do is try to give back in some capacity.
hmm
So if you could right now think about it, but for any young aspiring fighter who is maybe coming up through the ranks, maybe just getting started, whatever it may be, what would you tell them? Like what advice would you give them, or maybe even a couple tips that you would give them as they're getting started and understanding one what they're really getting into. You know what I mean?
yep,
Understanding what that looks like, what that road looks like. And then two, just maybe something to just help them overall. You know what I mean? Like what would you say to a young up and coming fighter right now?
yeah. Take yourself seriously, but not too seriously, right? Think it's one of those situations, right? You got to approach everything as a professional, right? If you're going to be a pro, you're going to go to the highest level. It's one of the things. Like I mean, I knew at a certain point that I wasn't willing to make that commitment, right? Yeah, take yourself seriously, but also it's like one of those, don't believe your own press clippings, right? You get out there and you start reading stuff, and you're like, you'll, especially for like a younger fighter, you'll read something and you're like, oh, this is the next up and coming guy. Then they start to believe it, and then they get too big of a head, and then they think they've already made it, right? The best fighters, I don't know that they ever believe they actually make it, right? Like the ones that are like the Manny Pacquiao's and the Floyd Mayweathers, it's like they're professionals all the way through. I think there's sometimes when you got guys that take a few losses or whatever, they don't have that same spirit and that same desire and that same hunger. Where you look at the guys like, the all-time greats, right? They never take their foot off the gas. Never take their foot off the gas, right? The Manny Pacquiao's, the Floyd Mayweathers, and we can go back even further. Ali, right? Never took his foot off the gas. Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard. Those are the greats. And if that's what you aspire to be, approach it as a professional. Obviously you got to have everything. You got to have the physical capabilities. You got to have the grittiness. You got to have the toughness. You got to have the work ethic, right? But if you don't have the work ethic, you're only going to make it so far. And that's pretty much, I think, Mayweather. That guy works as hard as any athlete ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody should ever minimize that. Same with Pacquiao. Same with Ali, right? Same with Sugar Ray Leonard, right? I mean, Sugar Ray Robinson. That's the difference. I mean, that's really, you look at other sports too, right? Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, right?
Yeah.
Tell me those guys didn't work hard every single day. They lived it,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
if you want to be that level, that's what you have to do. But on the same hand, if you're not willing to doing it, to put that level in it, have some fun.
Yeah.
Enjoy your traveling. Enjoy traveling the world, right? Enjoy the experience. Enjoy the journey,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? You only got one shot at it, right? Enjoy every single moment, right? Every old fighter, God, they always are like, that's what they always look back to, right? They're like, man, you know, they always have those stories, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. They do.
and enjoy it all. Enjoy the journey, right? That's my advice.
Man, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I feel like we could talk all day because then I got one more question that just popped up. So I apologize. But I got to ask you this too because I know like this is only given just a small picture of some of your background, things you've done. I mean, I know there's so much more to you, and we've talked about it. And I'm gonna have to get you back. On the show, we'll have to, after one of the fights or whatnot, we'll do like a quick breakdown or something. We'll do some other things. But one thing I want to ask you is there anybody that comes to mind in your years of watching boxing that you would say, man, this guy's probably one of the most, if not the most underrated fighter that I've seen? Is there anybody that comes to mind?
There's somebody that pops in off the top of my head right now. It's a guy out of South Bend, Indiana. Fought in the 80s, 90s, a guy named Harold Brazier, right? Harold Brazier in any other era would have been an absolute multi-time world champion. He was just a pro. I mean, he was like, he'd fight guys like Pernell Whitaker, right? And he would be competitive with guys like Pernell Whitaker. Missed out on a fight against Chavez, right? I mean, dude, he's just a solid pro, right? It's guys like that. I mean, even look at it. I mean, you can look at the guys like Buddy McGirt. You know, those kind of guys are really my favorite types of fighters. It's like the guys that grind it out, that learn and learn their trade as a pro. Like I said, off the top of my head, Harold Brazier. You know, he's just a freaking fantastic fighter, man. So slick. So he was just could do everything. So look him up if you get a chance. Right? He's out. I think he fought on ESPN more times than anybody. Well, a friend of mine managed him
Okay.
out of South Bend, Indiana.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
He was he didn't win an actual one of the major world titles, but the guy was like, if you watch him
Mhm.
and you watch it all the way through, and then tell me he wouldn't. You know, you look him and the dude could have fought Crawford, and I mean, I don't know who I'd pick. Right?
Oh
Could
wow.
have fought
Okay.
Spence. Yeah, yeah. I don't know who I would have picked. Right? That good. So he, you know, I think it was everything was so deep back then that he would have been a guy that would have been up there today, right?
Okay. Okay.
I mean, he was that level and so crafty, knew all the tricks.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
possibility with the new guys, man. He'd just take them to school. It's entirely possible, man.
Look,
Entirely
man.
possible. Hey, let's put it this way, right? He beat Mickey Ward.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
He beat Mickey Ward. Yeah, beat Mickey Ward, and it wasn't close. You know?
Really?
It
Really?
wasn't close. Yeah,
Okay.
it was pretty dominant performance.
All right. Well, that means I'm gonna have to check. I'm gonna have to check him out though, then, because I that's not a name that I'm familiar with. So I'm gonna have to check him out and see see if I can find one of his old fights on there. Especially since you said he fought Sweet Pea Whitaker. So that's one of my favorites all time as far as guys I used to
So
like.
I'll put it this way, right? I think we talked about Frank Martin. I think Frank Martin is the best prospect locally, probably since Lehman Brewster, right?
Okay.
Lehman Brewster, right? I mean, it's I think Frank Martin's the best since then. But then the era right before that was Harold Brazier. Then it was the people like Marvin Johnson, right?
Yep.
And it's like there
Yep.
was Indiana has a pretty solid background
I
there. But
forgot
yeah, I
about
think
Marvin Johnson. You're right. Yep.
oh
Yep.
God, you can't. That's one of the all time best light heavyweights ever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, out of
Yeah.
Indianapolis, what is he? Three time light heavyweight champion of the world.
Yeah, shoot, that's right. 'Cause
Yeah.
I mean, he used to had a daggone car commercial or something. He used to see it all the time. Yep, yep.
Absolute monster, though, man. Look those 175 pounders today. Oh, good luck against a guy like that.
You're right. You're right. I don't think they want those problems though.
No, no, no way, man. No way.
Oh man, that is awesome though, man. Man, Keith, I I cannot thank you, man, enough for taking your time out, man, sharing a little bit of your background, your story, man, and insight on the fight game, man. I appreciate you, man, and I do hope I can get you back on another episode of the Foxhole, man, so we can have another conversation regarding boxing, man, and fighting in general, man, and how things are transpiring in that game, man. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. You just let me know when. I will be back, and I'll try to be more educated on some of the newer guys.
No, you're good. Hey, you're good. We'll make sure we get up to speed up. We'll get you up to speed on that, and then we can really get your breakdown on those guys because there's a lot of hype around those up and comers. So I really would like to get your breakdown in terms of what you see, if you see any flaws, things like that on what you see in those fighters.
Oh, absolutely, man. That would be fun. I'd love to do that.
All right. Well, I'm gonna hold you to it, man. Thank you again, Keith.
Hey, man. You have a good evening. See
All
ya.
right, you too. Hey guys, thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Epic Podcast. You were in the Foxhole with your host, me, Justin Fox, and my guest today, Mr. Keith Palmer. You guys take care and appreciate you. Make sure you like and subscribe.